Baxie's musical podcast.
Resistance is useless!
In the summer of 2020, I interviewed Glen Matlock of the Sex Pistols. We talked about a bunch of stuff. We talked about being in the Sex Pistols. We talked about not being in the Sex Pistols. We talked about what was fact and what was fiction. Because when it comes to Glen Matlock, there's been an awful lot of fiction. For example, the story used to be that Glen was tossed out of the Sex Pistols for listening to the Beatles. Then the story somehow turned into Glen getting fired for listening to the Eagles. The truth is, he wasn't tossed out of the Sex Pistols at all. He quit on his own. Why? Because being a member of the Sex Pistols kind of sucked. Great band, pretty important too, but when you were actually in it at the age of 21 and you're being exploited and dragged through the savagery of the British press and you've been dropped by 2 record companies and the gigs are being canceled and you've pissed off the Queen, maybe leaving the Sex Pistols wasn't such a crazy idea. The Damned and Iggy Pop and Sylvain from the New York Dolls. He's played with Primal Scream. He was also in a band called the Rich Kids with Midge Ure, the other guy responsible for creating Live Aid and Band Aid back in the 80s. And in 2022, he joined Blondie on tour and is currently recording with the band as well. Simultaneously, Glen Matlock has just released another outstanding new solo record called Consequences Coming, featuring Clem Burke of Blondie and legendary guitar player Earl Slick. We talk about that, the late Vivienne Westwood, and all about the Danny Boyle miniseries about the Sex Pistols and the lawsuit that came with it. This is my conversation with Glen Matlock of the Sex Pistols on Baxie's musical podcast.
Hello.
Hey, Glen, how are you?
I had problems finding the link, but
It's quite all right. It's good to see you.
oh, okay.
Yeah, we talked over the phone around the summer of 2020, and we spoke in real general terms about the album that you just released. At that point, I don't even think it had a title yet, but Consequences Coming is absolutely fantastic. I love Head on a Stick. What a great song that is.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's been a slow train coming, but it's all right.
It's kind of nice to hear, and it probably isn't so much for you, but it's kind of nice to hear an angry Glen Matlock for a change.
I don't know if I'm angry. I'm irate. I do like that expression that revenge is a dish best served cold. And I think that's kind of the sort of the flavour of my album with some of the sniping that I'm doing lyrically in it. But I didn't try and make too po-faced a record. I'm trying to got a way of expressing myself that's a bit tongue-in-cheek sometimes.
Right. I was reading some other interviews you had done, and specifically one of the things that you're very passionate about is Brexit and how that's specifically affected how this affected musicians in the UK. Explain what Brexit has done to musicians over there.
Well, what it's done is cut the United Kingdom off from Europe. We were part of the European Union family, and we could come and go as we liked. Work, trade, fall in love, live there, and now we can't.
So as far as the restrictions go, is it a matter of visas? Is it a matter of waiting, or just more economically difficult?
Matter of visas, it's a matter of having a car now if you want to take instruments and trucks and stuff, then back line, and you're only allowed to stay there now 90 days out of 180,
Wow.
which sounds like a lot, but before you didn't need any of that. And it's become a whole obstacle, and it's put up barriers to trade, and it's put up barriers to trade with the car industry, who now all want to get kind of electrified and have, like Teslas. I've got a Tesla built. There's like Jaguars making one, but they get their batteries from Europe. And if they get them from Europe and put them in a car here and then try and sell that car back to Europe, it then becomes subject to all these trade barriers that weren't there before, that our government have voted for. And they can't understand why Europe are annoyed with us. Above and beyond that, it was a way of kind of hoodwinking the populace of the country to suddenly swerve and become far more right wing. It's like Trump with his wall with Mexico. It was just a whole thing to kind of make you feel, don't know, kind of insular somehow, or the baddies are the foreigners.
Well, I was going to say it sounds not too dissimilar to what goes on here in the States because, while many people were convinced of rhetoric of one way or another, whether Brexit was going to be a good idea or a disaster, we here in the States kind of get the same kind of thing. You just don't know who to believe. Do you believe the government that's in place? Do you believe the media? And voters and citizens are kind of left at a loss. Like, well, what's true? What's bullshit? It's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, well, one thing I've learnt in life is just got to constantly read between the lines and see who's got a vested interest about this, that, and the other. And I don't pretend to know all about American politics, and I don't know that I should be putting my finger in your guy's pie kind of thing. But I do know that there's certain people in this world that if you're sitting in a bar and somebody like Trump walked in, you just think he's a right wrong on that guy.
Yeah, right.
And you want no part of it, and you probably either say something or you just get up quietly, get your coat, finish your drink, and go to the bar down the road. That you don't want to be tainted.
Right.
with
Right.
that.
You mentioned that this was that the album was a slow train coming. You've kind of been dealing with a lot of issues with getting this record out. One, I mean, there's COVID in the middle of it, but then also you've also got very very busy along the way too, and some of it's great, some of it not so great. Tell me about what stood in the way of getting this thing out in a timely fashion beyond COVID. You
Well,
have,
just being an older kind of musician who's not particularly got a great track record of being a solo artist in his own right, getting the right kind of backing. Everybody wants to pigeonhole you, and you're the bloke who used to be in the Sex Pistols. Well, that's fine. I was, but I refuse to be just that guy.
And I think that shows because there's a certain level of respect when, for example, the folks from Blondie want you to join, on their tour.
I mean, in a way, that's put me backwards a little bit. In Blondie, I'm the bass player, and I enjoy playing the bass, and I like playing bass when somebody else is singing. But what my real calling in life is this album that I've made, and I'm just trying to, with the help of guys like you, showing some interest in it.
But you're
You
more
know,
than just the bass player on this record. Obviously, you're doing
well,
vocals, but also guitar too.
yeah, but I'm not even really playing bass on it. The guy who plays bass on most of the album is Norman Watright from the Blockheads. So I feel I don't know. I know you got soccer in America a lot more than you used to have. But if you watch a centre forward or a striker in an English football game, or maybe even an American football, somebody else has got the ball, but the guy at the front who's got to score the goal, he's kind of pointing to where he wants the ball to go so he can make the most of it. Now, if you're a bass player in a band and you're doing a show, right, but
Right.
you're the singer, and then you want everybody to clap along, and you over there do that, and you're playing the bass, you can't stop playing. You can't do none of that. So, but when a guitar, you can go blam, and you at the back there, you do that blam. So it's to do with showmanship as well. And anyway, I always started out as a rhythm guitar player. I don't pretend to be a lead guitarist. I
Yeah.
think it's a bit, if you want somebody to do some fine carpentry at your house, you might be able to bang a nail in the wall and put a picture up. But if you wanted a cabinet making, you get a guy in to do it. Well, I get a good lead guitarist in, and I've been fortunate. I've had people like El Slick playing with me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, you want to talk about a guy who's got a resume that's just pure gold. I mean, what an amazing career he's had, and
Yeah.
and it sounds great on this record too, like you would expect him to be.
Yeah, but I think we had a symbiotic relationship, and then that I've given him a chance to.
How long have you been doing Earl?
Maybe about 12 years now. I did a session with Clem and this other guy, Keenan Duffy, in the States, and Clem was in on the session. I met him. He was learning one of the songs, and he said, "What key is it in?" And the guy said, "Oh, it's in B." So he got his capo out, right? I
Yep.
said, "You put it on for that?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "That's cheating." He said, "You're going to be like that, Matlock." And I said, "Yes, I am going to be like that. So you better start getting used to it." And we got on fine.
So
So
as far as Clem goes, I mean, he's been playing with Blondie for forever and played with a lot of other people too. How did you get to know him?
I met him donkeys years ago in London. I think he came down with the rest of Blondie to see when I did a one-off gig with Sid Vicious, the Vicious White Kids, and he was there, and I met him. and we kind of kept in touch. He had an idea for doing another band with me and Paul Weller and Woody from the Bay City Rollers. I don't know what was going through his mind, but anyway, we kept in touch and we've done loads of different pieces of work over the year. And kind of just over a year ago, he called me up and said it wasn't working out for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't really know, and I'm not going to go into it anyway. But with the bass player they had, and they was trying to fulfil the tour that they should have done 2 or 3 years ago, but couldn't because of lockdown. And they needed a bass player, and they said, "Will you come and do it?" And I said, "When? In a couple of months." He said, "No, next week." And I was like, And I thought, you know what? I fancy doing it. I'm glad I have done it. I really love playing with them. They got a great body of work, nice guys. You know, Debbie's fantastic, and they got a real kind of Greenwich Village kind of cool about them somehow. They're interesting. You know, and do you know what? We did Coachella 3 weeks ago, and the next thing, Nile Rodgers is getting up with us, you know?
Yeah. Do you like going to those festivals, or is that a lot of headache for you?
I don't mind playing at them, basically, because you get your own toilet.
No, that's true. Because I mean, over the weekend, the Cruel World Festival happened in Pasadena, California.
Well, we did that last year
Yeah.
with Block.
Well, a portion of that show was rained out. So Susie, who hadn't played in the U.S. in 15 years, he got rained out. Iggy Pop got partially rained out, and they wound up rescheduling that part with Susie, Iggy, and Gary Newman last night. So they finally finished that.
Oh,
But
they
what?
did that. Cool. Yeah, good.
But
At
what
least
a
they got it together. Yeah, it's just, it happens with outdoor festivals. But I'll tell you what, I've only been back from LA 2 weeks, and not long before I came back, a couple of days, I went to see Iggy Palladium, and it was fantastic. It
yeah.
was really. And he finished up the set for an encore. He did, the Rose Bowl or wherever they played, but at the Palladium, he finished up with Walk on the Wild Side, and it was great. And he sat on the edge of the stage, and he meant it when he sang it.
Yeah.
It was really cool, and that was probably the last song I would have expected him to do. You know, and Chad was playing drums, who I actually met in Mexico. He was playing at the same hotel. It was Blondie in Mexico City, and I think they've been doing a Chili Peppers gig somewhere. So it was really cool, Chad, because it was dusk and there was a big garden in the hotel, and I sort of half recognised him when I went Flea. I thought he was Flea, but he wasn't. He didn't say, and he said, "You're Glenn, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah," but he didn't come up and calling him Flea, and he was cool. Yeah.
This has been kind of a weird year for you guys and the rest of the Sex Pistols. And I know you've been very vocal about what you felt about the Danny Boyle series that came out, and particularly how they portrayed you and your exit there. Then there's lawsuits to contend with. Where do you think that whole thing went wrong?
I don't think Paul was over enamored. I just think it's one of those things like Hollywood has an idea of what rock and roll is, and it's nowhere near the truth, really. And there's bits in it. You know what? I went to see the Elvis movie, which I kind of enjoyed, but how true it is, I don't know. But there's a bit in it, where Elvis is making his breakthrough, and somebody says, "Who's this guy that they're all going on about?" And one person says, "Oh, he plays black rhythm and blues," and another guy goes, "Coupled with white country and western," right? And it's like a real device, and you can see it coming. And in the Danny Boyle thing, you could see all these things coming. I was disappointed that it could have been so good, and it wasn't. I thought it was important that it was made because it was based on Steve's book, and Steve was the guy that formed the band. So.
I think the thing that some people had a problem with is that it did kind of come off in kind of like almost like a cartoon in some ways, where they're telling a story. It may be fictionalized in parts, and some of it just seemed to be, almost just not believable. And I'm sure it's a very different. It had to be very, very different, especially in the beginning, than what you saw. Were there parts of it that you thought he had right?
Not really, no. Maybe stuff that I can't comment on is Steve's upbringing, and his relationship with his stepfather, and I don't know, and we've never really spoken that much about it, and I doubt Steve particularly wants to, and I respect that. It's just Steve said to me, he said, "What do you think?" I said, "Mate, you got a shocking memory." And we went through this, that, and the other. But I don't want to make a big deal about it. I think it's been and gone. I was sort of supposedly like the Beatles too much. It's not true, but I think, you know, if he'd made a movie like Hard Day's Night, which is kind of shot in a very cinema verite kind of way, but is wacky and is deliberately surreal, it would have been more honest than something that's a partial kind of truth, and you don't really know where to. You know, nobody really thinks that Paul McCartney's granddad would come to the London on the train with them from Liverpool and go around chatting up all the girls, and they'd all be saying how clean it is. You know, it's just ridiculous, but it kind of worked. The Danny Boyle thing, I just thought it was a bit lazy, to be honest.
Yeah. Leading up to it, obviously there was a good deal of legal issues between the three of you and John Lydon trying to figure out the licensing of the music, and I know it got really ugly and it put you all kind of in a tough spot. Where are you guys now with this? I mean, do you still talk to them, or is it just too?
I spoke to Stephen Paul. John knows my number, but I can't remember the last time he called me up. And I think maybe when he called me up, possibly the last time, which was probably about 25 years ago,
Yeah.
it wasn't him who called me up. He got his kind of gopher to do it, you know. So
One of the things that kind of surprised a lot of people, and I don't think people realized how much Chrissy Hind would play a part in that story. What's the reality of that? I mean, how much?
Chrissy lives near me, and I said I went to see this thing. I didn't realise you and Steve were so close. I knew you were mates. She said, "Get off it. I only shagged him once." Chrissy said. I
Yeah,
said, "It's all over the movie," and she went, "Well, there you go." You know.
yeah. I mean, I knew she was around and in England and was around the store and everything, but like, was she that much involved? And I was kind of surprised to see that.
She was around. I've actually got in my scrapbook somewhere. You know, when you go into those old fashion photo booth machines, and it was like 4 pictures for $1 or 4 pictures for £1.
Yeah,
We did 2 strips, and there's me and Chrissy, and I've got one strip, and she's got the other strip. She said from like 1975 or something. She was around, and in
yeah.
fact, I remember being in this pub down the King's Road at lunchtime, and was just sitting there having a quiet drink. She had been writing the NME at the time, and she was very excited that she was going to go and interview David Cassidy, right? And he was sitting in the pub, and this guy walks in, and Chrissy started going, bop, 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 bop. So I joined in, and was singing bits and pieces, bits. Mike Smith from the Dave Clark Five had walked in, and he thought we was taking the mickey out of him. But we weren't. We both liked. He left. He looked and left. But I said to Chrissy when he'd gone, I said, "How do you know the Dave Clark Five is?" She said, "You kidding me? They was bigger than the Beatles at one stage in Akron, Ohio."
One thing I also wanted to ask you about, and I mentioned, briefly the Vivian Westwood died in December. Tell me about her. I mean, I know you worked for her and you've known her for a long time. Tell me a little bit more
Well,
about what she was like.
I knew her a little bit for a long time, but I hadn't seen her face to face until Malcolm McLaren's funeral, which was 8, 9, 6 or 7. I don't know how long ago it was now. And I was waiting outside for it all to start, and a cab turned up, and Vivian was there, and she got out of the cab, and she went, "Oh, Glenn's here. That's nice, you know." And we kind of sort of sent a few messages through her sons about something or other. But I hadn't really been in touch with her for a long while. But I like Vivian. She was, you know, very kind of stood her ground, forthright, clever, intelligent woman. Any success she'd had would have been totally on her own terms, which is very hard to do in this day and age. I went to China. I went to Shanghai maybe 8 or 9 years ago,
Hmm.
and I got there and I got in like sort of 6 o'clock in the morning. Probably had a bit too much coffee to keep me awake, and then finally got to the hotel. Then realised I was a bit wired from the caffeine. Thought I'd go for a walk. Oh, it's quite a smart hotel. I had no idea what to expect from Shanghai, and I got it because I thought, well, if I'm going for a walk, I don't want to get lost. I better find a landmark. I looked around, and the hotel was right next to a Vivian Westwood flagship store. Yeah, and that now that's something. Now, considering when I worked for her, she used to say, "Right, you know, I'm not a meat eater, but if you're going to that chicken and chips place, you know, like Kentucky Fried Chicken over the road, will you keep the boxes?" What do you want the boxes for? She, "Well, it's not the boxes, it's the bones." And what she would do would take the bones home, foil them up, and then sew them onto T-shirts and said things like rock and roll or perv or something like that. So that was my kind of dealings with her back then. And the next thing, I'm in Shanghai, and there's a flagship store. It's quite an achievement, really.
Yeah.
And when I'm fortunate and should have been, but I was honoured to be invited to a memorial service at Southwark Cathedral earlier on in the year, and it was just a who's who of the music and the fashion world, and in fact, talking about Chrissy Hynde, she sang a song, and she was big friends with Vivian, and she sang "Rain in My Heart" by Buddy Holly, and she got choked up halfway through. It was quite touching, you know.
Sounds like that store, by all accounts, was kind of like a sponge of people. I don't know if anyone who was actually buying stuff out of that store, but it certainly seemed to be a place where people were
Yeah,
hanging out and seen.
it was hangout. It was an epicenter of cool. No,
Yeah.
that's a phrase. Yeah, it was an epicenter of cool. Nearly anybody and everybody who passed through its doors at some stage went on to do something of some kind of consequence. You know, and you can't say that about many haberdashers.
No, you can't.
You know, that's what Jerry Nolan from the New York Dolls, you know, because Malcolm got involved with and the year where it's like it didn't quite work out when he managed him, but Jerry always used to describe him as that old haberdasher.
Speaking of Malcolm, the last time we talked, you mentioned about, we talked a little bit about him, and in the end of the Danny Boyle series. I mean, they certainly they depicted him in a certain way that made him seem either he was intentionally trying to create just this chaotic mess, or he really did know what he was doing. What do you think that was really in his head and driving him?
Both really, and I think in the Danny Boyle film, I think the guy who plays Malcolm, apart from the fact he sort of looks a bit too young, maybe not as far as Malcolm was, but in relation to the other characters. But I thought he had Malcolm spot on from
Yeah.
my memory. You know, that whole scene in the court. I wasn't in the court that day, but you know, just the way he spoke and this kind of choice of over embellished phrases and stuff. I thought it was pretty good. And the woman who played Vivian was good. She had her accent down. I looked her up actually, and then I thought, didn't realise I found out she's been married to Elon Musk twice.
That's interesting.
I won't push you that one, but she had Vivian Westwood's accent down just right.
You're going to be doing some solo shows, to promote the record. Consequences coming with Stiff Little Fingers. I think Peter Hook is involved in a couple of those shows, and then it's my understanding that you'll be touring again with Blondie.
Yeah, and through June, we've got like 8 or 9 or 10 festivals in the UK. We're doing Glastonbury, and we're doing this big thing called Dog Day Afternoon with Iggy's on the bill. And Stephen Paul have got a band with Billy Idol called Generation Sex, and they're playing, but they're below us on the bill. So, I've got that, and some more Blondie stuff, odd things later on in the year. But hopefully, I'm going to be back in the States in the fall with a lineup of mine. You know, I've been getting good feedback from the album, and you know, the record these days, although it kind of stands up by itself if people like it, but it's also a calling card, you know. And I did a one-off show at the Roxy in LA at the tail end of the Blondie dates that I've just done, when Clem played drums, Gilby Clarke played, and then even Fred Armisen got up with us doing backing vocals, so that's kind of cool.
It's funny how Fred seems to work his way into every possible show in Los Angeles. He plays with everybody now.
I'd never met him before, and he's a cool guy. You know,
The record is great, and like I said, Head on a Stick is like one of those songs that when I first heard it, it's like, I got to play that again. I've been playing it a lot in like the last couple of days. Like, it's just such a great song, and in a career in which you've written a bunch of great songs, I think that one really holds up. You should be real proud of that one.
I am. I think there's a few on the album. I'm quite, you know, I like Consequences Coming and All. It's not as quite as tough as Head on a Stick, but you know, you go through phases. I'm not being big-headed. I think I always write an all right song, but occasionally you come out with a better than an all right one. And I think that's one of them.
Glenn, it's great to talk to you again. I wish you best of luck with everything you're doing. Good luck on the road with Blondie and your tour and with the record. Great to talk to you.
Yeah. All right, mate.
All right.
There you go.
The name of the new album from Glen Matlock is called Consequences Coming, and be sure to check out the first single, Head in a Stick. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to like it, share it, tell all your friends about it. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can email me, too, at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.